The RMS Titanic is one of the most famous ships ever to set sail in world history. The following is intended to be a brief overview of her story for people new to the subject. Only some basics will be covered. Artwork and historical photographs will be used, however, some of the photos of Titanic will actually be the Olympic, as Titanic pictures may not exist. Now, Titanic was the second of the 3 Olympic-class steamships to be built in Belfast, Ireland, for the White Star Line by Harland and Wolff. First was the Olympic, followed by Titanic, and later Britannic, which was converted into a hospital ship for World War I. Now, all of these were built at the world's largest gantry, which had to be built to make the world's largest ships, and that was the Arrow Gantry, the Harland and Wolff shipyard. Construction on Titanic began in March of 1909, and she was officially completed on April 2nd, 1912. Considered to be state-of-the-art and virtually unsinkable, with watertight doors separating her 15 transverse bulkheads into 16 watertight but not capped compartments, she could float with 2 flooded, or even up to the first 4 compartments flooded. Possibly 4 compartments in other areas, depending on the location in the scenario. There's a lot of situations that you can look at. But in addition to those compartments, another safety feature was the lifeboats. However, for a ship of this size, Titanic was seen as the lifeboat, as lifeboats were considered more of a ferry service between distressed ships of this magnitude, and the appropriate amount of lifeboats were actually removed from her design, mostly for cosmetic reasons, as a large ship like this would stay afloat long enough for help to arrive. At least that's what they believed. But she actually still exceeded the lifeboat requirements of the time, but could really only accommodate half of her capacity. So in the end, she was completed with only 16 lifeboats and 4 extra collapsible boats for a total of 20 lifeboats. And this was seen as perfectly fine. When she was finally completed, she was the largest and most luxurious ship afloat, over 882 feet long and over 46,000 gross tons. Here's just a brief look of some of Titanic's amenities that made her so luxurious. Titanic quickly completed her sea trials on April 10, 1912, and was deemed seaworthy. Commanded by Captain Edward J. Smith and his crew, she was ready to sail. For her maiden voyage, Titanic set sail from Southampton, England on April 10, 1912, making stops at Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland before heading out to sea en route to New York. But before Titanic made stops in France and Ireland, there was a near accident when she left Southampton. While leaving Southampton, she almost had a near collision with the SS City of New York, as suction from Titanic's propellers ripped the City of New York away from her mooring. The collision was averted, and the voyage continued. Now, in total, when Titanic left for New York, she had an estimated 2,224 passengers and crew aboard, and this was not even her full capacity. Titanic spent a few uneventful days at sea, but sailed at full speed through icy waters, expecting that if they encountered an iceberg, they could avoid it in time. Ice warnings were received, but there's also a possibility that some ice warnings were either ignored or missed. Now, on the night of April 14, 1912, the calm seas made icebergs hard to spot, and at 11:40 p.m., Titanic's lookout spotted a large iceberg, but it was too late. She quickly struck the iceberg before she could maneuver around it, causing a gash on her starboard side. The damage caused flooding to her first 5 to 6 watertight compartments. As this exceeded what she could withstand, the ship was doomed to sink. Distress calls of CQD, and later the new SOS, were sent out from the Marconi room, and rockets were lit to potentially signal any ship nearby. One ship, the Californian, was believed to be within visual range of these rockets, but her radio was turned off and she did not understand the meaning of the rockets. And any attempts to contact each other by Morse lamp failed as well. So Californian's role in this tragedy is a little debatable, and it has since been proven that she was likely not close enough to help. However, the Carpathia did answer the distress calls and was the next closest ship. She immediately steamed to the Titanic to assist. Now, on board the Titanic, the order of women and children first was given to fill the lifeboats, as the crew knew that there was not enough boats to save everyone aboard. In order to keep things calm, the band came out on deck and played, and the crew worked very hard to keep the electric lights on as long as possible while the ship sank. As the lifeboats were launched, those that remained began to huddle on the stern of the ship or decided to jump off into the freezing cold water. For these people, there was no escape either way. Titanic continued to sink by the bow, and her stern slowly raised out of the sea until she eventually broke in two. With the bow gone, the stern remained afloat momentarily and then began to make its final plunge. So after the split, at approximately 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, a little more than 2.5 hours after the collision, the Titanic sank beneath the waves. And a few hours later, Carpathia arrived on the scene, and by 9 a.m. she had picked up all survivors, approximately 705 passengers and crew. The world awaited for news on the tragedy and would soon learn that sadly over 1,500 lives were lost. Carpathia brought the survivors to New York, and inquiries in both the United States and England were soon held to investigate and find fault. From this, it was deemed that Titanic was traveling too fast at the time of the tragedy, and that although legal, not enough lifeboats were supplied, and that these laws needed to be changed. Blame was also placed on Captain Lord of the Californian as having failed to answer the calls of the Titanic. The legacy of the tragedy is that regulations were changed for lifeboats. There would always now be enough for the capacity of the ship, and that there would always be lifeboat drills. Sea rockets would only be used for distress signals, and radios would now always be turned on and monitored. And there would actually now also be an international ice patrol to watch for icebergs. Now, Captain Ralston and the crew of the Carpathia, and even the passengers, they should all be considered as heroes, and they were, and they are to this day, for their role in helping rescue the survivors of the Titanic. They risked a lot going through that ice field to find the lifeboats. So they had a very important role. After the sinking, many ships were sent to the general area where Titanic had gone down in order to recover bodies. Of those bodies, many needed to be buried at sea, while others could be returned to their families. Any that were not claimed ended up being buried in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in cemeteries like you see here. Okay, so there you have it. That's a quick look at the Titanic disaster in 1912. I should also mention that in 1985, after decades of not being located, the wreck was finally found by an American and French joint team led by Dr. Robert Ballard. Lastly, I'd just like to mention that this video, again, was just meant to be a simplified version of what happened in 1912. But there is so much more to this story. There are so many details that we just couldn't fit in. And there's actually a lot of new theories and scientific evidence that can even change parts of this story. So I highly recommend that you check these other theories out, because there's a lot of specifics that we just couldn't get to in this film. And also, there's the human side. We barely touched on the human side. So, again, highly encourage you to check out more information, more videos, read about the Titanic disaster, because there's a lot to this story that has to be told. Thanks for watching.